everyone, Ad's here. Thank you so much for downloading and taking the time to listen to the show this week. If you like what we do, please give us a like and a share if possible. And if you love what we do, please consider becoming a patron. It means a lot to us and it helps us to develop and create more content for you guys. On this week's show, one of my favourite topics, as many of you will know for long-time listeners, I'm all about the working class perspectives. And I interviewed a PhD candidate in geography and environment at Syracuse University, Nicole Kleinheisterkamp-González, who I invited onto the show after seeing her being interviewed by our comrades in America over at Left Reckoning. The start of this show wasn't great because my computer started to shut down. I thought it was going to blow up at one moment, so I was quite rattled when we first started. But listen, it was great conversation. She was great from the start. I grew into it after I felt like my computer wasn't going to blow up on me. Nicole is someone who's taken field work to not the extreme, but to take some serious thought in doing her field work and studies. And she went and worked at both a car plant and also a coal mine in Germany, where she got to know workers. She got to understand workers' perspectives and had some real insight and some very genuine and valued conversations, which has given her work, I believe, that sort of nuance that is often lacking when it comes to workers and the climate crisis. So some of the topics for the show this week are her work in both a car manufacturing plant and a coal mine, like I said, working class voices and perspectives, the nuances of workers in the climate crisis, as I said, and just an all-around great conversation for anybody that's interested in working class views and their perspective when it comes to climate breakdown. I found Nicole really engaging and genuine, which is fantastic. And I am very interested to see where her work takes her and for people to listen to what she's got to say, to listen to workers. It's not always a black and white issue. And I hope that we cover it enough in depth so that people can appreciate just how deep it can go. Hope you enjoy the show, and let's crack on. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your time. So Nicole, please tell us a little bit about yourself and also what made you decide your PhD topic.
Ooh. So yes, I'm a PhD candidate in the US. This is, I think, my 5th year now. And before that, I studied actually in Germany. I did my bachelor's and my master's here in Germany. I'm in Germany right now. And I started actually completely different. I started with biology, which is has something to do with nature, but then suddenly I got interested also in societies and nature. And then I started looking into geography, which is basically that field of the connection between society and the environment.
Yeah.
And so I got passionate about geography, and I also became politically active when I was around 22. I'm 34 now. So when I was 21, 22 in Berlin, where I was living, I was part of the socialist youth of the Linke Party. And I was active there a couple of years, and basically I became a socialist. So that's how I think probably then what kind of inspired my topics later on that I would be interested in.
Yeah.
And yes, but I'm half German, but I grew up in Costa Rica, so I'm also half Costa Rican.
Yeah.
And I think also growing up in Costa Rica kind of had an influence in it, because it's a very beautiful country nature-wise, and I think that as a child growing up and going, in the tropics, going to the beach and stuff, being a lot in connection with the outdoors, I think it also influenced in my interest in the environment. Yeah.
Brilliant. So it sounds like really you've kind of got a similar background to myself in the fact that we started off political, quite revolutionary it sounds, and what we've done is we've incorporated the climate crisis into our politics. Is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's how. Yeah.
And so
it's kind of difficult, like, not to do it at some point, right?
And
Right?
a lot of people don't do it, and maybe we'll discuss that later. But can you tell us if there was a particular event, or was it sort of an evolution of your political thinking that actually made you think, do you know what, we really need to start incorporating the climate crisis now?
I think, well, I started doing my master's in what it's called, like, resource management, it was called.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that kind of like moved me is when I went back to Costa Rica for like vacations. And Costa Rica is, for people that maybe don't know, is in Central America. So it's in between, like, that's a very small country between like the South America and where the north part starts. And so it has the Atlantic and the Pacific. And my favorite part of it's kind of different also culturally, those two sides. And like the Atlantic is my favorite side, which is like the Caribbean side of Costa Rica.
Yeah.
And I had a beach there that I really, really liked. And when I was little, we would often go there, and I would remember that I would play in the sand. And I remember like the sand being like a very big space to play in. And then later when I came back, like I was like 24 or something, and I went to the beach, and like the beach was totally different. It was like, it almost didn't have a sand anymore. So like the water was kind of eating into the forest. So you didn't have a place to really, like, it was like totally different landscape. And the people that work there, because it's a national park, they told me that, that they have really issues with that, because the water is like rising every year, and it's like getting more and more into the forest, and it's basically like totally, completely different and not as beautiful as it used to be. So that kind of like, when I saw it, it made me really sad. And it also made me sad because the people there, obviously they live from also tourism in the region. And it's one of the most impoverished regions in Costa Rica. So I think that kind of shocked me, I think, a little bit when I like seeing that. Yeah.
So it's slightly different to me, because you actually were able to see it with your own eyes. You've gone back to a country that you're very much associated with, and you'd be able to speak to people and see the real sort of experiences of those sort of climate crisis conditions. Whereas where I live in Manchester, we've not really been hit by the climate crisis massively in regards to the rest of the world. So that's really interesting. Now, you said that you're a half German, and it's quite obvious that you're a proud Marxist as well. So for anybody that follows Nicole on Twitter, her Twitter picture is she's giving it the old fist next to Marx's grave in London.
In London. Yeah, they took it last year.
Yeah, so it's quite clear that you're a Marxist, and I'm just wondering. Obviously, Germany is a very interesting country politically, historically speaking. And there was a period in time where half of it was very much communist and half of it was very much sort of uber capitalist. Have you had any influences in regards to where your family are from, where you've studied in Germany, in regards to you becoming a Marxist?
Yeah, okay, I didn't tell the whole story. I grew up in Costa Rica, and I was born in Costa Rica, but my mom is from Chile. From South America. So I also have a connection to Chile. And obviously my mom, she grew up very, very poor. She was born in 1955. So she grew up in the 1960s, very, very poor. Allende came into power, and my grandfather, he was like you could say, like a unionist, union organizer, but like a union that's not really, like an informal union. And so my mom's side of the family has always been like very leftist and supportive of Allende, also because obviously when he was the couple of years that he was in power, that kind of the life of my family changed. My mom would remember, that she wouldn't like pass out in school because she was hungry. So I think that had definitely an influence on me. And I think in general, when I became that, I think motivated me to become politically active. And then in Germany, kind of like when I became active in this youth organization, it kind of like gave me like the more theoretical part of the equation of having this like feeling of having to change the world.
I tell you what's amazing. You've got connections to such amazing countries that have got such a deep richness in sort of Marxist history. So that's fantastic. So let's move on to sort of Germany and your research.
Yes.
Please tell us, again, why you chose that, or, what were the developments of you going to Germany and studying, what you studied?
So, well, obviously, because I'm half German, it makes it easy to come to Germany too. But my focus was I wanted to do research on industrial unions and the changes that are happening in these industries, either directly because of climate change, in my case, not directly, but like indirectly because of climate mitigation, theoretically. So unions in Germany are still, industrial unions specifically, are still like powerful. They still have political influence. They have institutional power because they have there are laws that allow for works councils to exist in industry. So, and that's although works councils, I don't know if there is something similar in the UK, but works councils are not directly from the union. They're basically representatives at the workplace that are elected by workers, but they normally are connected to a union, right? Because the only way you can bargain a contract in Germany is still with the union. So normally these works councils have connection. So all of this structure in Germany allows kind of like for, even though as in all the countries in the world, unions have been, like also union density has been falling, and like also union contracts. I think now we are around like 47% of working people in Germany are covered by a contract, whereas 20, 30 years ago, it was like, I don't know, like 80% or something. So it was much higher. Obviously, that's fallen.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of like it's still not like, well, I never think it's a lost cause to unions are always important. They will always exist because of the, contradictions within the system. But
of course, yeah.
Here in Germany, they're particularly still powerful, specifically also in the industries that I was interested in looking at, which are the industries that are going through these changes, which is the automobile industry and the coal mining industry. And so I chose two sites basically last year, and I started 2022 August, and I finished last year August 23. I did a year of field work. Half of my time I spent in a Volkswagen plant in the middle of Germany, and the other half I spent in a coal mine in West Germany that's going to close in the year 2030. So and the automobile workers, obviously, also, as we probably, maybe the listeners already have heard this, but it's also happening a huge restructuring with the introduction of electric cars. Electric cars have less parts than a conventional car. They have like 250 parts, whereas a conventional one has 2,400, something like that.
Okay.
So when you have less parts, it means less work that you have to put into, less workers, less hours, and that means you have to let people go. Automobile industry is a huge industry in Germany. You have about 800,000 people working in it, even more that are indirectly related to it. And the coal mining industry, although it used to be a huge thing back in the 60s, you have a huge thing in terms of like jobs. Now you have less jobs, also because automation and all of that also happened in the mining industry, and also because we're mining other types of coal than we used in the past. But it's still an important, in the region I was looking at, it was still an important employer, RWE, it's called the company, and also these workers, well, in 2030, they're going to stop. They're not going to, the jobs are not going to exist anymore. So I was looking at like what's going to happen with these workers. What do they think? There is a difference between ages. Young workers really have to like look for a job, whereas the older workers are probably going to go into early pension, and retire earlier. Yeah. So that's kind of, you probably have more.
I mean,
other questions
there's so many ways we can go here, but do you know what I'm really interested in? So when you reached out to these companies, one was a automobile factory and one was a mine, what did you tell them you were going to be doing, and what did they put did you have to convince them? Like, did you have to say, listen, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not going to do this? I mean, how did you even get in that position?
So that's an interesting thing, because I didn't talk to I didn't ask them permission.
Just turned
That's
up.
why I mean that, that's why I mean that unions really have a strong position here, industrial unions in these industries, right? because just for example, so people know, like Volkswagen in that plant, and Volkswagen in general has a very good, a very high union density, and the union density in that plant was like over 95%. So you can see they really have like a lot of power in it. Yeah. So I just basically contacted the works councils. The works councils, if you are the head of the works councils, you also have a very big role. Works councils also normally, they are freed from their jobs in the plant. They don't have to work in the production line anymore. They just work as works councils and they get paid for it in Volkswagen, right? In other companies, a little bit different, but in Volkswagen, it's like that. So I just contacted them also for the in coal in Garzweiler, it's the coal mine. I contacted the works councils, and I have to say though, it's two different unions. It's the IG Metall. IG means Industriegewerkschaft, that's the name for industrial union, and IG BCE, which is the union for the coal miners and also chemistry and energy workers. And it was easier to get contact with the people from the IG Metall, because that union is a little bit more leftist, the coal miners union is a little bit more conservative. So, and I think also because the situation of the coal miners is much more difficult. They've had really bad, in the last years, experiences with climate activists and in general with the media. They didn't want to talk to anyone. They told me if I had been like a journalist, they would have told me, no, we don't want to talk to you. But because I was doing research, they were like, okay, let's meet her. And then like I kind of like got convinced them little by little that, you know, I was interested in what they had to say and I wasn't judging them basically. And so that's how I gained access to the mine. And Volkswagen also, I did come a year earlier before I started my research to do some interviews with different works councils to see where I could like get my contacts from. So it was a longer process, but it wasn't that difficult as I thought it would be, because I thought they wouldn't really be interested in talking about climate change at all, but they were.
Okay. And so we're going to take it one at a time. Now, I think I know more about the sort of mining in Germany from what I've read and documentaries and whatnot. So, we'll discuss that in a moment. But let's start off with the Volkswagen industry, the company that you went to. And you said that their guys were slightly more left wing as a group.
The union, yes.
The union,
and
So
the union is social democratic,
Yeah. So were they more open to the reasons as to why their factories are going to close when you relate it to climate change?
The Works Council, I'm not going to name any names because obviously they are
of course
in anonymity, but the head of the Works Councils at the time where I started, they changed different Works Councils, but they were very similar. They had similar lines, and they are very progressive when it comes to mobility. They believe that cars are obsolete and actually shouldn't exist. They don't really make sense. And the best thing would be to create like a mobility that, would make sense for the majority of the people and not having individual cars. They know this. They know that therefore probably their industry will have to also change in the strategies of mobility, like car sharing and all that kind of stuff. Because also more younger people don't want to own cars. So they know this, right? But obviously they don't have the power to decide how production works. They're just the Works Council. But the Works Councils have very progressive ideas on what mobility should look like. Once you go to talk to the workers, I think it's mixed. I think when it comes to the climate movement, they have very negative opinions about it. But they do see, for example, they are critical of electric cars when it comes to environmental issues, because they often say, well, we know that they still have to extract minerals from the mines, and the working conditions back there where they're extracting are probably also not good. So they do think about all the context that comes to build a car. I have to say, in the plant that I was at, they don't build cars, they only produce components.
Okay.
And they're starting to produce components for electric vehicles. It's like a supplier, right? And then these components go to other plants where they assemble the actual cars. But they still have in their minds, they do think a lot about like the consequences of it. but you have some, and I would say more so because they're very different functions in a plant, right? You produce different parts. Some workers are really only focused on conventional cars, like the engines of those conventional cars. So those workers actually had a little bit more of a closer relationship to conventional cars and like gas cars, and like, yeah, I want to keep on driving my car and blah blah blah. But I was surprised that very often I would find people that were critical of electric cars, and that they would also not associate it really with like it being thought for the well-being of the world or of the climate. It's more like it's just a new business for Volkswagen. They were like very aware of that, right? And yeah, but I think what was interesting was, I mean, they were very critical of the climate movement. They would often tell me like, the climate movement, it's mostly young middle class students, and they don't really know what hard work is and stuff like that. And also there was, in both cases, also with the miners, there was a big association of climate mitigation with austerity, right? Because in Germany, we do have, right now specifically, we have obviously the energy crisis. The prices are very high in electricity. And the government is implementing some policies that at the end of the day, they put the costs of this supposed mitigation onto working class people. And these workers are aware of that, and they see it, then they associate it as something negative. There isn't really a thing where they could say, well, we could imagine a different type of climate politics. That's not a discussion in Germany, right? That we should go a different way. We don't have to, we could tax the very rich and then pay all that we need to do with more money. But the German government for decades has been very much on the line of like austerity and cutting public budgets. So all of that comes together into criticizing climate policies, because they are associated with like the continuation of this austerity.
And just before we move on to sort of the transition into new jobs, let's just move on to the miners. Now, the miners all over the world it's almost like a unique tradition, in the sense that it goes back hundreds of years. It is family after family after family, and it's a real identity with miners. It's not just a job for them, is it? It's a heritage, it's lifestyle, it's community, it's all these wonderful things. Just sadly for the world, it's actually based upon one of the most polluting industries that we can. Exactly. So I watched a documentary recently. I went to the actual showing of it. I can't for the life of me think what it was called now, but I did a little review on it as well. And what annoys me is miners are always portrayed like, what he did was the cameraman went down to sort of protests, and it was all mainly miners sort of protesting, saying they want this new mine to be opened. Now, don't get me wrong, this mine in Germany that's being opened, it is beyond humongous, destructive. They've had to destroy ancient villages and ancient forests to dig it up. You may know what the mine is. It's the name escapes me right now. But
I mean, was it the recent
it's the recent one,
where Greta also went there? Yeah, possibly, it's the mine. It's the mine where I was doing research.
Okay. Brilliant. That's brilliant. So in the film, it kind of shows these miners who are protesting that they want it to go ahead and they want the jobs as these sort of ignorant knuckle draggers, and it is almost like good versus evil and this sort of thing. And I think there's such a nuanced take upon miners and mining. It's this, like you talked about the people in the car factory saying it's just a job, and a lot of them were sort of young and a bit lefty, and they understood the way that it was going. Miners, these people might have been in mining for generations. Their great-great-grandfathers might have been mining and such. Not. It's a lifestyle like we've talked about. So talk to me about the attitudes of the miners to this sort of change in a more, if you can more of a nuanced sort of way rather than, oh yeah, they're all against it because, you know, give me some depth about the culture of mining and miners, yeah, and what it is that they're fearful of here.
Yeah, but also just parenthesis, when I was talking about the auto workers, it's not that the auto workers are super progressive and all lefties. The union is more lefty, but the workers, when it comes to cultural issues, it's still, you can still see obviously some conservatism in there. And in both cases, also in the coal miners, there is sadly a movement to the right, right? The right-wing party here, the AFD, it is gaining voice also in that, and I think it is very much associated to this thing that they are against climate mitigation, and these workers it calls to them because they are against this, because they associate it with a worse future, right? That's what they associate it with. But with the miners, yes, it's true. In they have a very strong tradition. The mine that we have in Germany right now working, we have 3 mining regions in the middle, like it's like a belt in throughout Germany from west to east. And the west side, it is a region that already had a very strong mining culture because they started mining hard coal like 200 years ago or something. And the actual coal where you go underground, right? That's deeper in the ground. And this coal, it's like 50 kilometers up north from where I was doing. So it's not specifically where I was doing it, but it was very close. And this coal, like at the end of the 50s, it got very expensive because I actually saw it in a museum there. It was very clear that, you know, they have this, if you look at the earth, like if you cut it like a cake and you look at the layers, the layer of the hard coal is much shorter than you would have it in China or in any other countries, I think the US as well, where they are much bigger. So when you mine it, you have much less, in the German case, much less coal that you would get in a specific time than if you would mine it somewhere else. So that made it not competitive anymore in the market once other countries came in with their coal, the hard coal. So from there on, they started going down in numbers. They had like 500,000 people working in mines back in the 50s. And then they went down, down, and down. Because the unions were so strong and they wanted to continue on with the hard coal. And actually the climate movement at the time in the 70s and stuff, they were more focused on nuclear power and not really focused on coal. That they were like, yeah, let's keep on doing coal. Like we're focus is nuclear. So coal kept on existing. The state subsidized it for many years, and so it kept on. Even if it was too expensive, they kept on because they wanted to keep the jobs basically. But it still went down, down, down. So there was a structural change in the region that you had winners and losers. The workers in themselves that were working for these companies, they had a compensation, went to retired earlier and blah, blah, blah. But the region around it impoverished at the end of the day after all these process of it. That coal ended 2019 was the last time they took some coal out of one of the mines. And so the workers that I'm looking at are further south, it's lignite. So it's an open mine pit. It's different. But they see what happened in the past with that kind of coal, and they would always tell me in the interviews, we don't want to end up like they did, right? In terms of like the industrialized, impoverished region, because even though they didn't fear for their own jobs, because they had very strong confidence in the union and in the company as well, that the company wouldn't let them just go, that they would just like. The good thing is that, well, maybe good thing for them specifically is that around like 70% of the workers are older than 45. So by the year 2030, they would be able to go into early retirement. So they will be like gone, and the younger ones are the ones that have to like requalify, do some qualification, and then transfer into a new job, basically. And the younger ones that I talked to, they were also kind of very confident. Many of them were very open to work for renewables. They said the same company that they're working for, they are now also RWE also does renewables, specifically wind and offshore, for example. So they were like, yeah, we're open to go offshore as well and work for the wind farms. But there is this very strong, actually also the region is very, they right now, actually, they are, how do you say, they have carnival. So it's like a region of Germany that's a very happy region. They like party. And right now they are having carnival, and like a lot of the tradition of carnival, like of these coal miners, they had like their own way of dressing, specifically the hard coal miners, specific like costumes, and they would like, you know, party in carnival and do like their own like party and in that sense, and they had a whole culture back, their own tradition. But the lignite workers right now, it's a little different than the ones that would go underground, but they still have this relationship to in overall the culture of coal miners. And also maybe for people who maybe say, oh, we always talk about industrial workers as being like these old white people in Europe, right? But there were many of the people I interviewed that were Turkish descent, right? That were, because we have many Turkish people in Germany from back in the day when they were bringing them to work here as guest workers. And they are second, third generation, and they also work in the coal mine. So it's very mixed, as it was also with the auto workers. It was also very mixed. But you have this thing of, yes, my father was a coal miner.
Yeah, I think one way we may be able to look at it to give sort of miners a bit of a break here is, you know, when we look at climate change overall, you know, we say things like it's like it's the end of the world, so we have to change because it could be the end of the world. Yeah, but for miners, it is the end of their world. You know, in a microcosm, you know, it's the end of their culture, their traditions, their drinking games, their camaraderie. And very much that when I've listened to ex-miners and have seen documentaries, it's almost a sense you get the same as when people go to war. You know, when people talk about their comrades that have been in war, and the closeness and the respect that they've got for their sort of brothers in arms, it's very much, it's got that kind of feel to it. So, you know, what I'm trying to get at is when somebody's basically saying, for the good of the planet, we have to end all of your traditions and everything like that, right? You might think, well, it's for the good of the planet, so yeah, of course they'll go along with it. But there's that much climate disinformation. There's that many people that are willing to stand up and say, no, that's rubbish and all this thing. So if there's even like a 1% chance that it's wrong and that your traditions and your culture and your heritage will survive, I completely understand why people will gravitate to that 1%, will gravitate to that rogue scientist or that personality on TV that says, don't worry, it's all rubbish, carry on. I completely understand that, which is why I understand why, as you've mentioned, there is this sense of a few of them gravitating towards right-wing groups, dangerous right-wing groups, who are feeding on their fears and giving them the disinformation in order to bolster their numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also, I think it is obviously the right wing are feeding misinformation of stuff, but they are not wrong in fearing that their regions might end up worse than they are. Correct. Right? Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about a green transition, whatever kind of transition, it's still within capitalism. So it's not going to be fair, right, for the region. Exactly, and it's not planned. It's completely arbitrary. The government gave money for this region they gave I think 14 million euros or something to transition, basically. But we have now it's 24 until 2030. It's 6 years. So we have 6 years to create new jobs. And it's no job has been created from this money that's like a stable job, good paying job. And these workers actually, like, although they have this fear of like what could happen to the region, they are like, look, we are fine with working in another place, but it has to have good working conditions, right? Because they know what it is to work for a contract that has union power behind it. So that's the issue, that you need to get, if you are creating new jobs in the region, they should be new jobs that are stable and that are good paying and that allows you free time to enjoy your family and all of that what they already have, and they know that. So that's, I think, also the and when and as you were saying about the identity, and many of them told me, like, yes, for years we have been this important actor in society, that we've been providing the wealth because we have been providing the energy for industries and for Germany to keep on going, and suddenly we are these bad people who are destroying the planet, right? And that's also, I think, where this animosity comes with climate activists, because they would tell me often, like, their experiences directly with, because obviously the climate activists would come to the pits, so they had direct confrontations with them, not like the other workers, they wouldn't, because you cannot go into the plant. But and they would, they would often be confronted with people telling them, like, how are you not ashamed to work for this company? Or they would be, many of them told me, I cannot corroborate it, but they would tell me that they were thrown stones at as well, like when they had these confrontations, and that they would, so. And the interesting thing is, one of them actually told me, like, yeah, it was and some told me they were like open and interested to understand what these climate activists wanted at the beginning of the whole thing. I think 2014, 15, when they started doing. But then, like, their relationships broke. And I think the climate movement at the end of the day wasn't able to really, like, make this, so far hasn't been able to make this issue about, like, a class issue as well. So they don't, they see it just as this foreign body that's coming into their world and telling them you're a bad person and you have to stop your jobs. And there isn't, like, any dialogue in between. Although they tried many times to, they told me that they had dialogues, but they wouldn't never find a middle ground, like a common ground. And even though they were interested at the beginning, then it just broke later on. But this, like, being proud about your identity and your job in the society, and suddenly, and also we're talking about men, right? It's mostly men that, so there is the ego is kind of bruised. Then one of them actually told me, not even the company wants us anymore. If you go to the main building, they have, like, the headquarters of that company is in another city, a bigger city further away. If you go there, you will see, in the past, they used to have in the lobby, in the entrance, huge pictures of, like, mines and coal miners, and there. And now if you go in, it's just wind farms and solar. So they completely forgot about us, and we're just like the scum, and they just want to get rid of us.
Yesterday's news. Yeah, I completely get that. I completely, and it's it's interesting to, like you say, it's mainly men, and these men will sort of be big, bulky, strong men. And it's kind of saying that, they take pride in sort of that macho sort of industry. And then now they're being told to go and work in Tesco's, if for the ego, for who your identity is. I can see that being pretty bad. So just going back to sort of the auto workers, so who don't necessarily have these traditions that we've talked about. Let's talk now about transitions. So something you said that really resonated with me there was, it isn't a lie that you may end up in a worse position when this all changes. And in England we had things like shipping. We had things like manufacturing that were massive for us for hundreds of years. And then neoliberalism came along, privatized and sold everything off. And, and we have our own examples. Like, for example, Manchester is very near a city called Liverpool, which is on the docks and stuff. And they had a massive shipping industry, for hundreds of years. That got sold off, privatized and whatnot, and we're moving away from shipping now. And that's a really clear example. Like, Liverpool went through decades of deprivation, because basically it was almost like, right, well, go and do something else, go and work there, But I think the key is good state planning. And, the miners are going to have their point of view. The climate activists are going to have their point of view. At the end of the day, it's all about systemic planning. One of the best things that I've heard of in the last 10 years is obviously something called a just transition within an environment movement with political ideas. And if that is done right, then it won't be a perfect transition, of course not.
Yeah.
But it could be a pretty decent transition. Now, this might be a stereotype, and you can tell us if it's true or not. But when we look at Germany in England, we have this idea that Germany is very sort of like, you know, has all its ducks in a row, and you know, it always does the right things, and it's very, you know, very efficient and very.
Not
this
so much?
Right? Well, there you go. Which is a shame, because what I was going to ask was, you know, in the UK, just transition is just neither here nor there at the moment, because we've got the Tories in, Labour are rubbish. Yeah, it's just all over the place. But what's happening in regards to a just transition in Germany? Just going back to the auto industry that you did research with.
So I think if we're talking about, because just transition is a very broad right now, nowadays a very broad concept. Basically, people use it for any interest that they have specifically in a topic. But if we're talking about the work, just very specifically about the workers that I was looking at and their union that represents them, basically what they have done, they were able to bargain. The automobile workers, I see it a little bit less stable, because the auto industry is just right now like changing very rapidly, and like nobody, like it's very insecure for me what's going to happen in the future. And Volkswagen just announced that they would cut, I don't know, 16 billion euros worldwide. They had to make cuts because they wanted to grow 6%. I don't know. They wanted to have a huge return of sales because they have not been doing so well. And that would mean, obviously, when we're talking about cutting, it means always jobs. So I think I haven't talked to the people that I interviewed now since this announcement was made. So I think now they're probably more insecure than they are when I interviewed them, that they were very sure that it's going to be fine for them.
Okay.
But what the union has been able to bargain, also the union for the poll workers, which is very similar kind of solutions that they found very specifically for these workers, is that they're going to go into early retirement. Also the auto workers, which, by the way, I didn't mention, but like in the next 10 years, that plant is supposed to lose between 5,000 and 6,000 jobs. The plant is huge. The plant is 16,500.
Right.
So, so what the works councils think the way they hope that it's gonna work out is that the older workers are gonna go into early retirement, and it's gonna be like a step-by-step losing these jobs, and the younger ones are gonna remain there working and then taking over the functions, or not taking over because the functions maybe won't exist anymore, but they're gonna work in something else for the electric cars. And so that's, and also what these unions also do very often is that because they're very powerful, they are able to bargain what they called insurance, place insurance, you could say. Like they are ensuring that plant is going to continue to be open and gonna continue to have jobs until the year, in this case, 2029. So Volkswagen, they have assured from Volkswagen that nobody's gonna lose their jobs until 2029. So they are not allowed to fire anyone. That's basically what they were allowed. They could bargain. Obviously, in 2029, they probably have to bargain again another year.
Sure.
And then in the miners, it's similar. They also, well, they don't have this future because they know when it's going to end, but they have early retirement for the workers, right? For the older ones. So this is basically, we're talking about a very narrow view of what a just transition is, then you could say, well, these workers have it solved, basically. But when I was there, it's obviously we cannot see a transition just about these jobs being lost or not lost and what's going to happen to these workers, right? We have to see what's going to happen to the region once these jobs don't exist anymore, to the purchasing power in the region. All the other people that are, especially in auto workers, you have a lot of suppliers that are dependent on, that supply the plant with material and stuff. These people are very, very insecure, these smaller companies. And so we have to see and also for the unions themselves, it's in their interest to get out of this defensive position of like, let's be sure that our members are fine. They have to get out of this, because at the end of the day, they will lose members because these jobs are not going to exist anymore. So the unions are going to dwindle, they're going to shrink again.
Yeah.
So they have to think, they should think, and there probably are people that are thinking about it, to think more offensively politically in how they want, what kind of idea of a just transition for the entire country they are thinking of, right? Like what kind of new industries we should be building, and what kind of new jobs, and new jobs that are actually organized as well in unions. So I think that's where the unions, that's the step the unions have to make, to get out of this defensive position into a more offensive one and having a bigger say in politics. Something that industrial unions haven't really been doing, because they have, so far it's been stable over the decades.
Yeah.
But like when after World War II, and when Germany was like coming back together, the unions did have a strong political say, and like out of that period, we came the laws that we have right now that allow for works councils to exist and stuff like that. So, and the unions back then had also like a very different view of how this is, they had a more kind of like a more anti-capitalist view of how society should look. And I think that's where kind of we should go back to, because we are in a point of where we want to, where the society has to change. So unions have to develop their own views on how that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And it would be great if that could happen together with other movements, right? With climate activists and stuff like that. But then on the other side, you would need climate activists to also like, understand the other side of the equation.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it before, so this might be an easy answer actually. But in regards to now back onto the miners, so you were saying that everybody in the mine there's nobody under, say, about 45 years old, and so when the mine comes to its natural end, it's almost like everybody retires. And is it
not everyone? Because the idea was that the plants in Germany were supposed to, the mines are supposed to end 2038. But what you were remembering about this big thing that happened, you remember that I was telling about Greta Thunberg that was here about this mine that they were doing protests. That was because they decided to move it 8 years earlier to 2030. That region only. The other regions supposedly are still 2038. So now the miners, they had bargained for the older workers to go into early pension by 2038. But now it's like, it's 8 years earlier. So there are more people who will not be able to go into early pension, and who will probably be around 45 by 2030 and will have to find new jobs. So that's going to be like tricky for them.
What kind of figures would be, do you know how many workers will be roughly around that age?
Yeah, and the region has 9,000 people who were, so it's, and I would say, the thing is, also when you close a mine, it's not that it's closed that year. It's going to continue working until probably 23 years later, 33, because you have to recultivate it. And the recultivation phase takes a while. And you need people who are experts in water, because you need to get the levels right. You need the miners still to put back stuff into the mine and close it and recult. So all of that you're going to continue having it until 38. That's what they were telling me and they even think, probably looking at the issues with gas from Russia and all that issue, they think, well, maybe we will probably maybe they will change opinions again, and we will mine 2 more years or something. They don't know. It's still unsure. But for the sake of it, 2033. So I would say probably more than half of the workers are going to be in an age where they could go into early pension, I would say. And the others, they could either get a compensation and look for their own jobs, their own way. They could go into what they call a transfer company, where you stay a year, and that company or that institution is basically charged of looking for a requalification for you, and helping you find a new job. That's basically, and many of them, of the workers, they expect that they would like to continue working for the company, but for renewables, right? For the other side of the, that's what many of them were saying as well, because they want to, because they know that it's like stable jobs and for the RWE, for that company. So they want to continue doing that. At the end of the day, I think it's very unsure how it's going to look, because as I said, there aren't any jobs being built. There's a lot of investment in research of new technologies, but that doesn't mean that the jobs are going to stay there. If you develop a technology, it's going to be researchers, right? It doesn't mean that the technology is going to be built there or whatever. So that's still, and they have been, and there are a lot of criticisms of how the money is being used right now, because the money is also going to stuff like building bicycle paths, you know, or a whole, you know, like infrastructure, but it's something that's not creating jobs that are going to continue to exist over the years. That's how I don't really think, I might be wrong in the future, but I don't really think it's gonna be such a big problem for the workers to find new jobs for these younger ones. But if they're gonna be this, you know, the same quality, that's gonna be the issue. One of the people that I was talking to was working in the they have I forgot how do you call that in English? A laboratory in a lab.
In the lab.
Because this company is huge. They have all kinds of functions. So the lab, they look at the oil for the machines in the mines and stuff like that. And one of the lab workers, she was telling me that she was very afraid. She was the really one that was really afraid about her job, because she didn't have a bachelor's or a master's. She wasn't an engineer, but she was doing the work of an engineer. And so if she was looking in the market at stuff like similar to her, she would need a bachelor's, which she didn't have, and she didn't want to study again because she was my age. And then the jobs that she could get would be lower than the ones because she was working in that company for many years, and she got up the ladder basically learning a lot of the stuff she was doing in the lab with practice and stuff like that, but she didn't have a title. So that's an issue for workers that are like specialized in something, but they don't have a title or anything that could corroborate their knowledge. That's an issue that might appear for them.
So you've done your research, you've had your experience, you've spoken to tons of people, you've been there on the ground, you've seen it, you've done it. What are your takeaways from it? What has, now that the dust has settled and you've written what you've written, or you're in the process of really processing what your experience is, what have you gained knowledge wise that you think might be key to workers and the climate?
I think knowledge wise, I think, even though, because we could say these are the workers of the working class ladder that are the best positioned in society because they have strong unions, good payment, good jobs and so far. Even though these workers might feel that they're safe in what's going to happen, the younger ones, right? What's going to happen in their future, even though I think that's still unclear if it's going to be the way they want it to be. But even if it is fine for them, they still fear a deindustrialization and an impoverishment of their regions. So it's not like I would say only people who are maybe in a precarious situation are gonna have this insights of, oh, this could end up badly. Also, they have, they also worry about what's gonna happen to their region, and they associate, as I was saying before, that these climate policies, which as I was saying, it's not right, it's not wrong to that it's actually a correct view, that these policies are at the end of the day putting like the costs on working people.
Yeah.
And they think that's unfair. Many would tell me, for example, now the government some months ago, they brought up a new law that where the heating systems in houses have to change over the next years, but we have to change it to heating pumps, basically, right? To electric pumps, and instead of gas or oil.
Yeah.
And they were saying, how is many of the people I interviewed, like, how is someone who's maybe old or retired and doesn't have the money, and lives in a house, how are they going to afford to change the entire heating system in there? They're not going to be able to afford that, right? So they see that there is an issue of class and costs, and it's not fair, right?
Yeah.
And now also with for example, the carbon prices are going to go up this year, huge. So the prices are going to go up in general, were already high because we stopped buying gas from Russia. So all of this is like, it is a feeling of like the future is not going to be good. And it's all because, we're being told we have an issue with the climate. And sadly, there is no strong alternative in Germany right now, in terms of a party that could bring an alternative, right? That could make people imagine a better future, that the climate mitigation doesn't mean that we need to have more austerity or you have to pay all these costs, right? It could be different, but it won't be different if it's with the parties that are, that are part of the establishment, because they don't think in terms of class, right? For them, that doesn't exist in society. And sadly, the leftist parties, the socialist parties, are very small right now, are in a very precarious situation. So that leaves space for the right-wing party to falsely tell stories to these people and move them to a wrong direction, which is even obviously at the end of the day worse for the climate, right?
Definitely, yeah. And what I always say is as well, that because the world's so complex and there's so many levels to fixing systemic issues and whatnot, an advantage that the right has is that they have these very simple messages that resonate quite well with the working class, because what the left will do is the left will read 10 books, and try and explain those 10 books in a really convoluted way, of why we need to do this and all that, and you know what? And that's because the world is complex.
The world is complicated, but there, but there are people who are able to,
yes, of course,
explain complex things in more, easier ways for people to get.
But the right, what they do is they hook onto feelings, and they simplify to its most narrow, basics, And what they'll do is they'll hone a kernel of truth. There'll be a kernel of truth within that message, like we discussed. There is a potential that miners will have worse lives if the mines go. It's a kernel of truth. And then we hook onto them feelings and have these very simple messages, and it resonates so well. What would you say for the people that you've spoken to in Germany that have been perhaps that have resonated with these messages? You've seen them talking sort of like these sound bites of the right. How do you think we need to speak better to people about the situation that they're in? Have you got any tips or any advice about how we talk?
Yeah, I mean, what they were telling me, they were telling me that the fears of people should be taken seriously, right? I think also even in the left, there is a tendency of some people seeing these workers they're conservative and racist anyway, and
reduce it down to just these
reduce it down
racist,
to that,
ignorant.
and not taking the material, because at the end of it, it's really material fears that they have.
It is
not taking that seriously. And I had one guy who told me that he was going to vote for the AfD, And it was interesting because he was a very sharp man. And he was he like understood a lot of things the way, like I would say, correctly. And then he would like, he's telling me, yeah, we are really struggling in my family right now because we really are thinking about voting for them. And I was like, why do you want to vote for them? And I'd say, well, because they are, he said, for example, we're not investing in education anymore, and we don't have enough money for kindergartens or something like that. And I said, and you think they're going to do it differently? And then he said, well, we're going to have to figure out, we're going to have to wait until they come to power and see how it is, right? And he told me, like, he told me, I'm not a Nazi. I know that it was a dictatorship. It was a horrible dictatorship, and have nothing to do with it. But still, I would. So even if, in knowing that these people are very right wing, the party is very right, even that is not enough for him to have said, I'm not going to vote for them, right? Because of his
material conditions,
of what he sees the reality is going to change, and he's afraid of that changing into worse, right? So that was very interesting for me, that he was, and also, well, at the end he will also say, well, I'm also thinking about voting for them in protest of the current government, what they're doing right now, which is, at the end of the day, the politics that they are bringing forward. But it's very tragic that the left is not able to talk, like to capture,
to recognize those fears. I completely agree. That's what we need to do. We need to recognize these fears and where they're coming from, and not sort of denigrate or talk down to people with these real life fears.
I think it is specifically in Germany. Also, the Linke party is very much associated with climate movements and all these like cultural movements. So it kind of like does, at the end of the day, create this rupture of people, working class people who are not part of these movements, not seeing the party as somehow representing their interests. Even though the politicians within the party would always say, well, we are actually representing this interest, but it's not the way people are perceiving it, right? And I think that's where also, like, kind of the issue of climate change has to be not something that is morally, that you with finger pointing and what's morally better to do and what that's wrong, everything. I think it really has to be part of a larger project of saying, we're going to stop austerity in Germany. We're going to stop this madness because Germany, we have a very strict fiscal policy, which is basically destroying everything in Germany, all infrastructure and all kinds of investments in any kind of future we would have. So that's something that the left should really be like looking climate movement, not as climate as a topic that's close, but seeing it as, we're going to make Germany a better society for working class people, and climate is going to be a part of it, but it's going to be a larger project of, And
that's
just what I would hope.
Yeah, and just lastly, let's end on a positive if we can. So, for everything that you saw in both camps, was there anything that you viewed or studied and thought, actually, that is a really good idea? That is a one way to go for the rest of the world to copy it, or to, whether it's creating bridges, whether it's worker democracy, whether it's just strong unions. Was there something you saw that stood out and was like, if we are going to solve this issue, that is definitely going to be a part of it?
I think.
Please say yes.
Yeah, I mean, difficult to say.
It must be one thing.
I would say there are many people in the unions and in works councils that are very sharp and really know what's going on, right? But sadly, they are not represented in the political sphere by any party. They're not integrated, right? Most of them vote for the Social Democrats, but they will always tell you, oh, I still vote for them, but actually they're shit, but I still vote for them because traditions, right? It's like it's like the Labour Party, basically.
Yes.
So, but I would say that what I was impressed about is that there are many people in these unions that are thinking about this in a bigger picture and have really good ideas. But the issue is you need to bring all these people together and come up with larger societal project. That's the thing. But what I would say is what I've a thing that I have, which is not directly related to my research topics, but is related to Germany and unions, is that there is a coalition of the other union, which is Verdi, that's the service union, who right now they're bargaining contracts for the public transport workers. And they have actually come together with some climate movements, with like, I think Fridays for Future, if I'm not mistaken, to basically like push this issue about we need more public transit and more investment in public transit to make lives better for workers, but also because of climate change. So I think that's a good thing that's happening right now in Germany, and that's something we would need more. Obviously, for transport workers in the public transit, it's easier to make that connection with climate change. I think as if you would with coal workers or with auto workers, but I think there needs to be an effort to from climate activists also to work together with unions. That's, I think, key.
Definitely.
And I hope I hope they're learning that lesson.
I'm fast. Nicole, you've been a fantastic guest. It's one of my favorite topics, as I said at the start of the show. I'm going to follow your work closely. So anything you want us to promote, anything you want to send our way, you think our audience might want to have a listen to or a watch, please send that our way. And thank you again so much for your time. And I wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Okay, this is the part of the show that's dedicated to the fighters, the healers, and the conservatives of the world that are doing their bit for all of us. It's the shout out. Okay, Nicole, who have you got for us this week?
Yes, I have a big shout out for two
go for it.
Groups. First, in Chile, I don't know if you heard, but we had a huge fires in the middle of Chile, in the coast, Viña del Mar. Very horrible. More than 100 people have died, obviously related to climate change, but also apparently to real estate speculation, which makes it even more horrible. So apparently the fires were intentional. Yeah, were intentional because it allows for real estate to buy the lots cheaper, apparently.
Evil.
But there are many people right now helping these people who are left without homes. I think 3,000 people were left without homes, and all the families that have lost their loved ones. And if people want to maybe donate to these fund, one is, I can write it to you later. You can put it, but we'll
put it on the link. We'll put it on the link. Don't worry. People can click on that link.
Okay, it's the Fondo Nacional de Reconstrucción. That's one. And then another big shout out to the UAW in the US, who is organizing auto workers in plants that so far have not been organized. I heard that, the UAW organizers have been able to collect signatures in the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, which they so far all the attempts to organize that plant have failed. So I really, really hope that they get it done this time, and that all the plants and all the auto plants in the US are hopefully soon on their union contract.
Yeah, of course, brilliant. Just send us the links, any links at all, and we'll copy them in. Of course, you will. And just want to say something as well, which of course you'll know already, Nicole. But just in case we get a load of climate deniers to say, how can it be climate change? But then you said it was arson, arson as well in Chile, and that's because obviously climate change creates the conditions for worse fires than normal. So you can have cannot have arsonists and climate change. And they can both be true at the same time. Really appreciate it, Nicole. True. And listen, a big thank you to you, and a big thank you to everyone that is listening. And remember, I say it every week, if you're helping the planet in any way at all, no matter how big or small, we love you, we appreciate you. I hope you join us again next time. Take care, everyone.
We'd like to say a massive thank you to all of our supporters on Patreon, and a special shout out to our top tier patrons: Barbara Burke, Pierre Munt, Jill Burke, Jolyn Stone, Karen Taylor, Lizzie, Marie-Louise O'Hanrahan and Steve Smith. Thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to join these amazing people and support the show, head to patreon.com/G&D Media UK. And if you can't afford to help us out, please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much.